Hello viewers, welcome to your weekly State of Affairs program here on QTV, the Gambia's first private TV station. And we are broadcasting from our studios here on Karaba Avenue. My name is Alio Sise. And as usual, I am here with my co-host, Sidi Sidi. Good to have you on the program.
Thank you so much, Alio.
Thank you very much. That is Sidi Sise, my co-host. As you all aware, some Gambians are still trying to recover from the heavy downpour, which actually left many households, especially within the Greater Banjul area, inundated, and people are still trying to get back to normal life. And joining us this week to discuss the floods and how to address them, and of course looking at the lessons learned from this, we are joined this week by Alpha Robinson, who is the Managing Director of Africa Consulting and Trading, a company based in Dhaka. He had once also served as the Managing Director of NAWEC, that's the National Water and Electricity Company. He's an engineer by profession, actually. Mr. Robinson, thank you so much for being on the State of Affairs program.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Also in the studio, we have Dr. Malanding S. Jaite, who is a Geographic Information System and Landscape Ecology expert, but also a project manager, ecosystem-based adaptation project. Mr. Jaite, welcome to the State of Affairs program.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Let me start with Mr. Robinson. I mean, like I said in the intro, you are an engineer. You have served in different countries, in Germany, in UK, and Hong Kong. Also, like I said, served as Managing Director of NAWEC, but NAWEC is not the discussion here today. We're looking at the floods. What do you make of the recent floods that has really caused so much damage, especially within the Greater Banjul area?
Well, good afternoon, first of all, once again. It's a defining moment, really. That's how I would put it. Defining moment in the sense that it has really shaken us out of our sleep, if you like. Now, of course, people have been building everywhere in the country, and we have been lucky. I think there have been floods before in different areas, but this one is perhaps more defining because it is more widespread, and it seems to me, I may be wrong, but from what I can see, the effects are really much deeper and quite devastating. And I think what we wanted to do here, we don't have the solutions, because every flood situation, every situation you want to deal with has its specific aspects, and what we want to do is just to share some experience and some knowledge and some thoughts, which hopefully would help.
Yes, you talk about the impact. Let me just bring in Dr. Jaite here. What must have changed to result in this heavy downpour?
Well, a lot of things have changed. One of the main ones is really climate. Climate change has brought to this country what is very unique in that it has made our rainfall pattern more erratic, and it has come to a point where we cannot predict when the heaviest rain would come or when the rains would even start or end. So when something like that happens, you may end up having extremes. We spend the whole of July with no rains, and only the last 2 days of July, in fact, one day in July, we received what may amount to almost 25% of the entire rainy season's rain. That day's rain only, amounts to about 230 millimeters out of 950 annual rainfall. It shows that we are really almost a quarter of the annual of the year's rainfall falling in one. So when something like that happens, it suddenly has got to make a lot of people. It's got to find a lot of people unprepared. And this is something that we, who are in the climate change world, have now come to get used to, i.e. we are always expecting the unexpected. And I think that is something very important, because then whatever we are doing, especially in the settlement development or in general infrastructure development, we've got to take into account extreme conditions. And this is really where the hit got really harder, because we have not really looked at these kind of extreme conditions, much more prepared for them. So when the rains came, apparently very little could be done but just to sit and wait for them to pass.
I mean, you talk about infrastructure. Certainly, I mean, the flood had caused so much damage to so many infrastructure, and this is where the work of engineers will come in. People want to sound it as, you know, the viewpoint of experts like Mr. Robinson.
Yeah. Let me just add to what Malanding has said. I mean, climate change is a global phenomenon. And one of the things, as he rightly said, that is uncertain is the prediction of rainfall. I mean, sea level and temperatures are fairly robust in the predictions. But in addition to that, there's also the fact that the land use has changed significantly. To give you an example, as a child in Banjul, growing up in Banjul, most of these compounds in Banjul in those days were not paved. You had sand, and when it rains, the water will just pool, and then at some point it will seep through. So when you pave, as we have seen happen a lot, as urbanization, spreads, what happens is that what used to go into the ground is no longer going into the ground, and it has to go into the drains or somewhere else if it cannot find a route out. So that's absolutely important too. Rainfall patterns are changing. Extreme rainfall events predicted in part very intense, sharp, and not necessarily long. I think what we've seen in the last few days is really an exception in that you had many of those. But again, this is what happened. So rainfall is increasing. The intensity as well as the amount of water that is falling as rainfall. And on top of that, you are now actually adding more water as runoff into wherever it is supposed to go, into the environment. So in the case of Banjul, for example, they have rehabilitated the drainage network, but the drains have not been increased. The size of the drains have not been increased. So what does that mean? It means, the drains will now have to carry more water. The point where all the water accumulates, or most of it,
and those images we're seeing are from Banjul.
Yeah.
That's just around Tobacco Road to Bond Road.
Yes. So you can see, I mean, the fact that there's so much water. As a child, I've never seen so much water in Tan. And I think that is partly got to do with that, the climate change effects, the urbanization, but also the fact that a lot of space that should have been holding water is now being used differently. And by the way, Malanding, I believe actually Tan is a Ramsar site. That means it is an internationally protected site. These are sites that are protected internationally and declared as such. So again, I want to emphasize what I said last time around, that it would be a very bad idea to do any more, to allow any more development to take place at Tan Bay. But also another point I want to make, in Jabang, and we'll come to that. Yeah. When you look at the case of Jabang, you see a lot of water. Jabang Estate, Ibo Town, So there is a lot of water. If you were to be shown Tan, you would probably think the water is coming from a big stream. And
that's Jabang we're saying.
And this is Jabang we're saying.
Exactly.
So very often what happens in situations like this, and I know now from talking to Sidi, and we'll talk about that later, based on the maps you've shown, it may actually be that the amount of flow, which is the amount of water passing through in cubic meters per second, is not large. So it may actually be that you don't need a huge stream to channel that flow. But if that flow isn't going anywhere and it is accumulating, I mean, I don't know really, but I'm just saying from what I know as someone who's been involved
as an expert in that area.
Well, that's exactly what is happening.
Yeah.
Because if you looked at, Ali, I know it's not my time yet. But
come in.
Okay. When you looked at Jabba, as you talked about, you see the water coming from Jabba. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an expert. You can help me here. The water coming from Jabba. I'm sure my good brother, Dr. Jaite, knows that area. If you come from like Abuko, I've seen a map that he has done. Hopefully we'll see the map later. From Abuko right down to Tautu, right down to Jabba, Labakore, Madiana, all the way to Madiana, all the way to Tanje, Brufut. That's a stream.
Yeah.
It used to go. So if you looked, as we speak right now, that stream is no longer there. People have settled on those streams. So as for this is a question for Mr. JT and for you.
I think
really, based on that, what can one do now?
Yeah, I mean,
we'll come to that. Malanding has put together these wonderful maps.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to set that stage to focus people's minds on the fact that the amount of water you see there is not a reflection necessarily of the amount of flow, which is the amount of water passing through any given point at per unit time. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think, again, this is the case that when development starts or when settlement starts, we end up creating what I would call impervious surface. Surfaces that will not allow water to penetrate. And as you rightly said, years ago in Banjul, most of the compounds were not paved, but they also ensured that the building codes in those areas are designed in such a way that buildings' floors are some feet above water. I mean, and that, in other words, would accommodate any rise in surface water during the rains. Of course, eventually they dissipate, but they would not harm the building quality or even quality of life in the houses. So what we have seen over the years, especially in most of our settlement areas across the country, is that very little attention is paid to the overall structure of the landscape. I mean, the landscape in general, wherever you are, have depressions, that is low ends and up ends. And those depressions are meant to do one thing, collect more water when the rains come. And they end up being part of streams that end up emptying into the ocean. And the Tanje stream is one of those many streams that we have in this country. And they were well done at one point because they were also the hub for our biodiversity. Big trees, I mean fruit trees or whatever, were there. But when development came, it did not really look at everything holistically. It did not really pay attention to what goes on in Busumbala. It has some connection to what ends up in Tanje. And so at the end of the day, people were isolating, or they were doing things in isolation. If you look at the historical map, which we quickly did for Jabang in particular, this particular Jabang estate, the historical map 2004, for instance, and this is only 20 years ago, 2004, and that would show you that very little settlement within the stream bed. The only human activity we had was use of that stream bed as orchards and rice fields. And until 2010, you could easily see that rice field space. And yes, you have trees, but very little. But that was able to handle, the land use, because land use, that is, if you are doing rice farming, you need more water in there. And in fact, that's why our ancestors used that place for rice. But when 2011 came, what happened in 2011 is that estate demarcation happened.
Would you say because of the change of land use, probably, and it's not been done properly, we are paying the price for that now?
Oh yeah, I mean the lack of holistic planning is what we are paying for right now. And often if you start wrongly, it costs you more to correct. And this is what's going to really be the case in most of our developed entities, our so-called, our settled entities. So the fact that when the estate was being built, because it was the open space, perhaps the only empty space, they did not think of the consequences of putting up an estate. And when it came to that level, you end up having a situation where water does not have any place to go. And the water not having any place to go, has to go somewhere. And, this is nature's way.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Jaita. I would just ask the control room, I think, to display some of the maps so that we can discuss in detail. I think that will really guide the discussion as far as, I mean, this program is concerned. Why they try to display? Okay, Mr. Robinson, I mean, we're having some of the maps now on the screens.
Okay, yeah, we'll look at it. And this is a project that I led in the UK, and it's what we call strategic flood risk assessment in the UK. And it's just really to demonstrate, as Malanding was saying, if you want to have a holistic view, you have to take the bird's eye view. Yeah. You know, you have to look at things from the top. Otherwise, the person who is flooded in Jabang Estate, he or she only sees the flooding around Jabang and what is around them. They would not even know where the water came from and how it got there and what is elsewhere. If you lift them up and take them to the position of a bird high up in the sky, then not only will they see what is happening right there, but they will see what is happening around them. So that's what these maps try to do. And the starting point, and I believe very strongly that these are the sort of maps that we need in the country going forward, not just, you know, dealing with this. If you have maps like this, it shows you rivers, watercourses, it shows you, you know, the infrastructure, it shows you critical infrastructure, you know, boreholes from utility companies that may be contaminated, you know, power plants, you know, major bridges. It shows you all of that. And what it enables you to do then, I mean, in this particular case, this map you see here has 3 color codes. Everything that is white means that the risk of flooding in those areas is low. So you can go and build there. But if you build there, you need to make sure that you don't just discharge and cause more flooding. So in the UK, they have regulations. Yes, you build there, but you have to reduce the flow, retain it as much as you can. Then you have the other areas where the risk is medium, in other words, less than 1 in 100 years. And in those areas, you have to manage the risk. And then there are the more extreme cases where the probability is much higher. And in those places, you know, the regulation is a lot more stringent. So going forward, if you to have a map like this, so in this particular case, you see the green area near Horwick. That is one of the areas they wanted to develop. You know, so they're showing you, even before you start your planning, this map is showing you what sort of risks you need to deal with. And then there are other areas as well. So when you do that, and Malanding being a GIS expert will be able to easily do that, get some base maps, put all this information together, the Ramsar sites, the ecologically important sites, the sites for boreholes, because you don't want to have, you know, too much activity happening around those areas where you think you will be building more roads. So you kind of have an overlay of different layers of different information, and then you can begin to plan.
In our Gambian context, who should probably develop
such a map, and where do we start?
Such a map, and
Exactly.
where do we start?
Exactly.
Because it is good that you know, you explain the UK.
Yeah.
We have crisis right now.
Exactly.
And something like this can be very helpful.
Yeah.
Who should lead?
Who should lead it?
Well, it's not just who should lead this, but actually who has what responsibility right now with the flooding.
Yes.
So, you know, who should be dealing with the case of Jabang? Who should be dealing with the issues of flooding in Ibo town? You know, who should be rescuing people? Who should be helping people out of their homes? Who should be paying for the cost of X, Y, and Z? So I think there is a need, in my view, to, in the first instance, really start talking about who should be doing what. And part of that conversation, part of that consultation, out of that will come out which institutions are best placed to do that. I mean, when it comes to mapping, if you want to institutionalize it,
Yeah.
you'll be look at the environment. They have a lot of mapping. You'll be looking at physical planning. But it's important to define who does what, the roles and responsibilities.
But in
If I may come in here, I sincerely believe that the physical planning department has, for the longest time, and the Department of Lands and Survey, have been the forefront of at least mapping what is where in the country. They are the custodians of where all our plans are supposed to go, where all our buildings. So it used to be that they were very active too. That is, when I say used to be, around the 80s, you could not just put up a building structure without having a building plan approved. You could not go out there and do other things without showing at the site with the contractor having all the details of those plans. Nowadays we have fewer.
This was in the 80s.
This was in the 80s, and we even had a master plan kind of not Greater Banjul, but from Banjul all the way to Farato, for instance, where development was supposed to be organized and regulated. We had places I marked as buffer zone, for instance. Those were supposed to be left open in order to absorb these kind of issues, as well as provide open space for our living. So all of those were there, but unfortunately, much of them were disregarded. I would say almost all of that plan was disregarded over the years.
Why?
Well, again, Gambia had gone through trauma. Because by the end of the Jawara administration, you had a very functional physical planning office. But by the end of Yahya Jammeh government, physical planning has been reduced to responding to the executive needs. And often those executive needs were not based on technical strategic plannings. It is often based on what the business guy next door wants or what the executive next door wants. And those kind of reactions by the planners make them almost irrelevant. One of the things I say is physical planners here, some of them were double masters. But it's the alcalos that allocate land without consulting the physical plan.
Yeah.
Until the guy who has the land goes to, and he takes the note or the alcalo's so-called transfer to the physical plan, and physical plan just endorses it by accepting it and putting it on their base map. If it goes the normal way, is that there would have been a master plan from here to Basse. That will I indicate every single piece of land, what it is useful for, not who is to use it for, what it is useful for, what can be in that place for the country and whoever is going to occupy its interest. That way, when you get the land, you cannot convert it into some space, station. It's got to be cropping.
Yeah.
But now with the current reality, there is no proper planning.
Exactly.
People just build anywhere they want, whatever they want to build.
Yes.
What do we do now? And so we are able to address, this problem.
With global warming, with climate change and all this,
it's going to cost us more.
This is not something that is like it's going to happen today and tomorrow is not going to happen.
Exactly.
We are not wishing for the worst, but it's going to happen if major actions were not taken.
And that now, it has already started in some ways, where we have to pay more because we made errors in the past. A good example is the highway that is being built now between the airport and Banjul. This battle had the widening of it.
Exactly.
Houses had to be brought down.
Yes.
Most of them costing millions of dollars.
Absolutely.
And that is a loss to the country. But that is what we have to do if we are to reorganize our land again. Sadly, it is going to cost a lot of money. And if it is a fault, not the fault, but it is through acceptance of governments, government is the one that is participated in accepting the positioning of a particular structure and the building of it by endorsing through the agencies. Well, government would have to take part in adjusting the cost to whoever has paid for it. This is why people have been told that government will have to compensate you for those structures that were endorsed by either physical planning or some other office. And sadly, those kind of payments we'll have to do. It's going to be part of our growing pain.
Yeah.
Let me just
Yeah.
come back on that, if that's okay.
yeah.
When you look at the map like this, it's different things coming in there. You have infrastructure, you have land use, you have water courses, you have environment, you have so many things. And these things will, if they do exist, will sit in different institutions. Yeah? And what we are talking about is somebody needing to come and bring all of that together. You either designate one institution to do that, or in the case of the UK, actually, the people who do that, and they've seen a niche, there are companies that are set up that collect all this information, different types of information from different sources. They put them together, using tools such as GIS, and they actually sell them. So if you want to build anywhere, you will go to them and they'll give you flood maps, they'll give you land use, they'll give you, infrastructure, they will give you ancient, architecture, archaeological remains and all sorts of things. So in that way, you can see what the constraints are. So to come back to the question, who should do it? I think it is spread and it is part of the discussion and the conversation that must take place, but somebody must be charged with the responsibility of taking different pieces of information, putting them together to give us a holistic view as to what it is. Unfortunately, we are where we
We
are.
have a physical planning unit in the Gambia. I suppose they are the one who should be responsible.
Well, the physical planning if you ask physical planning for constrained maps, I am not sure they have
But
them.
we've seen
and-
like today. I think
Yes, Sidi, yes, we give a break. I will be back. Well, viewers, you're watching QTV State of Affairs here on QTV. I am Aliou Cisse. And our guest this week, Alpha Robinson. Like I said, he's the managing director of Africa Consulting and Trading, a company based in Dhaka. He had also served as former managing director of National Water and Electricity Company, and Dr. Malanding S. Jaite, who is a geography information system and landscape ecology expert, who is also the project manager of ecosystem-based adaptation project. We'll go for a short break, and when we return, discussion continues.
Espas Motors is the largest and most modern auto service in the Gambia. Espas Motors is the only authorized dealer in Chevy, Mercedes-Benz trucks, Mercedes-Benz buses, Kia, Ford, Futon Mini and Midi buses, Futon trucks. At Espas Motors, we have qualified professionals who use modern technology to diagnose and repair all brands of motor vehicles. Espas Motor services include auto sales, auto repairs, vehicle painting, availability of high-quality spare parts, towing services. We are reachable at any time. Call Espas Motors on 352222 353-4444 or locate us on the Bertil Harding Highway. Espas Motors.
Hello viewers, welcome back from that short break. You're watching QTV State of Affairs. I am Aliou Cisse, and you're watching, like I said, QTV, the Gambia's first private TV station, and we are broadcasting from our studios here on Kairaba Avenue here in the Gambia, West Africa. Yes, Mr. Robinson, you talk about the importance of developing such maps to guide in terms of infrastructure development. Let's look at the tools. I will ask the control room to display the animation prepared as far as the tools are concerned in terms of developing such.
Yeah, absolutely. There are tools that are called hydraulic models, and they do come in different forms depending on the manner in which you want to simplify. So what these tools do, they try to replicate what happens in nature, by using mathematical modeling techniques.
And that's what you have on the screen now.
Knowledge of hydraulics, yes. So you can see from this one, this particular case was looking at a dam breach. You have a lot of water being held behind and it breaks, and it shows you how the water propagates from that point all the way to wherever it gets to, depending pretty much on the topography. So these types of maps, I mean, these ones are called 2D maps, and they're usually more than enough. And we use those to look at river flooding as well as pluvial flooding, which is direct rainfall falling onto the topography and how that moves around. So what these maps do, they show you the areas at risk, and it's mostly driven by topography. But, they can also be used very effectively. And in engineering, this is what we do. You do this, then you have your baseline. So now, this is what it is. And that baseline can start from any moment. So for example, in the case of Jabang, that baseline could be what you have now, and then, or if you want to go back to what it was before, but you have to start somewhere. And once you have your baseline, then you can start looking at different scenarios. So
let me give you some quick information here. This morning, we had all the NRA, National Road Authority, Disaster Management Agency, Physical Planning, NAWAIC, GAMTEL, all in Jabang for a demolition exercise.
Right.
But unfortunately, it did not take place because no one was served the notice for demolition.
Really?
So after 4.5 hours sitting in the estate, they had to pack up and go. Is that the way forward? Just to, like you said earlier on our program, knee-jerk respond to deal with the issues there? Because you said earlier we must, have the bad view to look at where this water is coming from.
Yes.
But not just because water is sitting in Jabang. You want to be reactionary to do the firefighting and just open that water to flow. But where does it go?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to come back to what I said earlier, that the amount of water you see, and at that point we were talking about ton. The amount of water you see is not necessarily a reflection of the flow, which is the amount of water passing through per unit time. So if you relate that to the case of Jabang, it may actually be that you could have a stream that is, of a certain size, which will easily, possibly sit within the estate, or it may be that you will have to find a way to weave it in. Yeah, so you will probably, because of the high density of urbanization in the area, some houses may need to be knocked down, but you may not need to knock all the houses. So again, I come back to what I said. In engineering, we look at data, we look at information. These types of maps give us information. You have flood models will give us information on how flows develop and so on and so forth. And then you can use that to start looking at different scenarios. I mean, when we come to Jabang, I'll talk about some possibilities, looking at the maps. I mean, you can see that from what I can see, it's not just the estate that is the problem. You also have a road, which from memory, is at least the same level, or maybe a little bit higher than the estate. So
I request the control room just to display the map on Jabang, just to.
Okay, just to help us have that conversation. Yeah. But a knee-jerk reaction, in my view, is not always the right thing to do. I think in extreme cases like this, there are things that need to be done and can be done right away. And so, for example, in Jabang,
you're having.
Yeah, in Jabang, the urgent task now is to take the water out.
Okay, so that probably is the right way to go. Start demolishing.
No.
You said the water needs to go.
To take the water out.
To take the water out, yes.
The water out, not the development out. You can pump the water out. Yes. That's what I'm saying.
But now they're thinking of, you have to knock some walls down. You said that.
Well,
some walls need to be
let's allow me. I think Mr. Jete wants to comment.
That's what would be using the proverbial sledgehammer to solve the problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I do not see that. I mean, the damage is already done.
Yes.
The water that is there now can only be reduced.
We have seen
so
that map.
The first map, the first slide would have been, that would show the extent of the engagement across the landscape. I mean, so the red box in the middle is only the area that we are talking about.
Yes, you're having it on the screen there.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's the only one we are talking about now. That is Jabang Estate.
Yes.
But above it, that is to the right of it, are settlements. To the left of it are settlements until you hit the Tanje strip,
Yes.
where the water empties. So even if you demolish the road now, the water will have to flow through many households or many houses before it finally gets out to the sea. You know, that's the nature of it, because water cannot just, you break the road, maybe water would flow out.
I missed that bit. You talk about houses.
Well, the fact is, from the road going, I mean, that is, if you are coming from Sabij, you're going to Jambanjeli.
Yes.
From the road going left all the way to Yundum is settled now.
Yeah, it's settled, yes.
And the same point going right,
Yes.
you can go, I mean, you would spend maybe another 3 kilometers or so, and you will hit Tanje. It's all settled too.
Yes.
There is no open area.
Yes.
And the settlements are what? Compounds.
Yes.
Okay, and those compounds, if the water starts moving, it's going downhill.
Yes.
It can only go downhill, and that downhill is, it has to go through some compound, somebody's road, or what compound front house, until it gets to where it will hit the actual creek in Tanje to empty into the sea. So that's the reality on the ground. So if you want to do anything, you want to limit the damage. And for me, the limiting the damage is to allow the water now to recede. Let the people who are affected hold it until the water recedes. Then we can go down in there and see which one of between two compounds or between two houses, or which compound can actually need to go, so that the next rain water would flow without causing more damage.
So do you agree with that?
That's not how you do it, Malande. I beg to disagree. But let me first tackle where we were. Okay. I'm not saying erase Jabang. Remember, one third of Holland is below sea level. 1/3 of Holland is below sea level. So that means you can control water, because if a piece of land is below sea level and there's nothing done, it will all be flooded, will be filled with water. So I'm just giving that as an anecdote, as an example. What I am saying is that water being stagnant, staying there, is a hazard. With time, you have pathogens and so on developing in there. The only way at the moment that the water will come out is through evaporation, you know, and that is going to take a long time for it to evaporate. So what I was saying is, you have to remove the water as a matter of expediency now, and the way to remove the water is to go and pump it out.
Yeah, but this is what we don't have. We don't have those pumping machines, right?
Yeah.
And if you pump it, where are you going to put it? That's another problem.
No, if you pump it, you will have to then speak with the Environment Agency to agree to a place where it can be safely discharged.
Those spaces are not there. That's what Malande is saying.
No, what I am saying is, if your soakaway is full, if your septic tank is full, don't you have tankers that come and take it and pump it?
Yes.
So in a similar way, you could have an army of tanks.
Army of tanks. We don't have that much tank in this country.
But there are tankers that are emptying your soak away.
Yes,
the do nothing scenario is to leave it as it is and just wait for the water to come down.
No.
But of course, that is, in my view, not the right thing to do. You have to try and get that water out. The only way you can get it out now, because it's sitting in a hole, is to pump it. The only realistic means I see. Either you get the fire service, but you told me they don't have such equipment, or you get these tankers that empty soakaways. I think that would be better than having the place filled with water, families displaced. With regard to the water course, engineering is about control when it comes to water courses and rivers. So what we are talking about, and that was my point of disagreement. Malanding, is that you can engineer the stream.
Yeah.
If you look at a lot of water courses in Europe, in the West, they are all very straight. A natural water course is never like that. A natural water course varies. It goes wider, it goes narrower. You have branches going left and right. So if you are faced with a situation like this, where the effect of flooding is so severe and so detrimental, what you do is to do what they call river training. So you build channels, rebuild channels based on data that you would have looked at, you would have done the sort of calculation that you need to do this kind of modeling, and then you can channel the water where you want it to go. That is what engineers do. Nature moves it as it wants, primarily based on the topography. Engineers take it and they take out the effect of the topography as much as possible and move it through wherever.
Okay, from what you're trying to explain here, are you trying to tell us that perhaps the engineers that we have in this country are not really doing the work right?
Well, the problem is not whether the engineers are doing the work right.
For
The
example,
problem is that
for example, we have seen what happened in Banjul. Despite this huge project, multi-million-dollar project, I mean, Tobacco Road, as we speak, is flooded.
Yes, I think the question is, are we planning?
Yeah.
And are we doing things to the right standard?
Yeah.
The engineer does what you want them to do. If it is a very good engineer, though, if you're doing something that is wrong, he or she will tell you and will give you advice. And in fact, some engineers, to protect their integrity, may actually say, I'm going to walk away from this because I don't think it's the right thing. So in the case of Jabang, I don't think this was ever looked at. I don't think there was any planning. I don't think, anybody looked at the assessment, tried to assess risk and so on. Banjul, I don't know the history. I don't know the details. But obviously, we have seen that there is a problem. I mean, and there's another hidden problem. Yesterday, it rained, and somebody shared some images from Banjul showing a lot of flooding on the roads. So there, and when I walk through some of the roads, a lot of the roads, I actually see that the collection points are very limited. For example, I walked through what used to be, I think, Blank Street. I could only see one manhole. It wasn't a gully, but one point where the water could go to. And if you have roads with curbs, meaning, you raise the edge of the road, the water must be provided a place to go into. So I think, we're not asking the right questions. We're not doing things the right way, and we're not using the right standards. So the problem is not the engineers. The problem is with what we have here as a structure. And I come back to what I said earlier, that I think there needs to be consultation. There needs to be, this should be a wake-up call.
Exactly.
That should bring, different parties together, as they did in the UK when they had 2007 floods, brought people together, different experts, and they looked at the problems holistically and came up with recommendations, that are very clear.
I think that is where we are all agree that there has to be some kind of holistic planning.
Yeah.
I mean, it is not enough for physical planning to do their own thing in one silo, and agriculture doing it in. I mean, this Jabang, my understanding is social security.
Yes, social security, yes.
Estate.
Yes.
I mean, social security is state-owned, yes. And if there was some kind of national land use map that designates areas based on what they should be used for, it would have easily picked that, well, an estate cannot be here because of A, B, C, and D. Okay, but so that kind of interaction hasn't happened. That's why we may. And even if it had happened, it is possible. An engineer said, sorry, this is not a good place, but overruled by a higher authority, perhaps, or someone who desired to do the job. For instance, in Banjul, where just a few years ago, in fact 3 years ago, I went to Bond Road. and Tanbi, which is still a Ramsar site, there was active reclaiming of that site, filling it up and building structures. All that happened over the last 4 years. And of course, the question is, who authorized that? It was authorized by one part of government that desired to promote investment and possibly development of the country's economy, not knowing that piece of the whole country really is a zero-sum game, especially Banjul and its wetlands.
Exactly. Now, Mr. Robinson, let's look at this animation. We're saying there's a vary from 2005 to 2022.
Yeah.
What is responsible?
Yeah.
I'll let Malan deal.
Can we have it?
Yes.
That's 2004.
So let them start one. Yeah, if we start from that.
Yes.
This is the blue line here.
It's on the screen here.
Yes.
The blue line here is actually the extent of what could have been the influence of the stream.
Okay.
And as you zoom through or you focus on, you see that road that used to be the old Jambanjeli road, not paved, and you see only Jabang a little bit north of it showing up, very little development, a lot of woodland, a lot of thing, but you can see the stream bed very clearly.
Yes.
So
that's the blue line, right?
The blue line is the
the
extent of the stream's influence.
Okay.
And then when you go to the
So
next,
what is the stream line here?
if you look at the center of the stream,
Okay.
between the two blue lines,
Oh, yes, I
you
can
see some white
Yes.
as he said, the natural water courses are never straight.
Yeah.
So you see that meandering going on, and even if you zoom in further within, this is just from Google, but if you zoom in, you would actually see the water's way in the middle of between these blue lines. And then when you go in 2010, for instance, this is right before the estate came in. The red circle here is where you have the more or less the rice field, the remaining area that was not built.
Yes.
And you can see a village already developing on the north side of it, as well as some settlements on the south side of it. Everybody living alone, the wetland, more or less.
Okay. So like the red circle was the wetland then?
That is the center. That's the center of the wetland.
Yes. That's why we settle now as Jabang.
Okay. So if you look at the boundaries of this ellipse, we did not change location. We just left where it is. And then the next slide, which is 2011.
Go to the next slide.
Yeah. You would see that is where they demarcated the estate. You can see all the roads and all these streets being demarcated right in the middle of this wetland.
Lake.
Well, during the dry season,
I was giving a line in the lake.
Yes.
So this is definitely one of the major causes.
Wow.
So when you go, as soon as they started developing, what you then have is building the impervious surface, because every house that is built is a collection point for water, and the area is a reduction in the amount of area available for water to sink in. And of course, another compounding effect may have been the road. When the highway is built, the next one will be around maybe 2022, the last slide perhaps. Oh yeah, okay, this is 2020. You see that the highway being complete, may finally seal the deal for this area, because
Nail the coffin.
well,
Find a nail in the coffin.
maybe it's a nail in the coffin. But again, what we need to understand is all of these things may have started with good intention, but without holistic planning, without some technical assessment driving the process, that is data-driven process, you end up doing the wrong thing, because almost the millions and maybe $1 billion is spent in the estate already. And what are we going to do? Knock them down? Fine, but it will not erase the pain. It will not erase the problems. In fact, it is just going to start a new pain and problem process, because where are you going to put those people? So we may have to do what others would call re-engineering. We now have a thing. We now need to find what mold fits best in the least cost. and least problematic.
I'm talking about re-engineering. Let me bring in Mr. Robinson here.
Yeah.
Going forward,
Yeah.
what should we do?
Well, going forward, specifically for Jabang, I would come back to what I said before. That's what we do in engineering. If you're looking to cross from one end of the river to the other, you don't just go to one point and say, I'm going to cross from here. You look at the different options, you know. Similarly, you look at different options here, and it may look like there are no options, you know, but I would totally disagree. I want to come back to what I said before. There's a lot of water now, but if you look, maybe the flow is no more than 1 cubic meter per second. 1 cubic meter per second is not a lot. If you take that same flow over 2 days, multiply seconds by 62 minutes, then minutes to hours and hours to days, you have a lot of water. So the first thing in my view that needs to be done is to go on site. You need to investigate. You need to look at what possibilities there are. You know, you have people walking the site, engineers who will have some idea of what sort of things there are, and it could be either open channel or culverts or pipes or whatever it is, and then you begin to look at where could things pass, you know. So you look at options. I mean, if you look at that map to the north, for example, there is this Salaji forest. Yeah. I don't know what the elevation differences are between Salaji forest and this place, you know. But if it is a forest, it may be that it might actually be a good place where you can put some water, for example, you know. And it may be that you could have a water course going through the estate, or you may have a water course going past the estate, you know.
Is not anywhere close to Jabang estate. This is the problem. Like Malandi have said earlier.
Yeah.
You know, go to the front and the back, and as you go further, it's all built.
That was just one example.
You have Latria, you have Jabang, you have Nema Fulakunda, you have Jambur, you have Jambanjeli, you have Sanyang. So it's a crisis.
Ultimately, to me, ultimately, what you want to do is to reconnect to the water course. So you have this problem area. There's a water course coming here. There's a water course going down. I mean, I just mentioned this thing as an example because it is open land. I mean, you know, I don't have the the distances, but ultimately, it's about moving this out of the way of the watercourse system that is already there. It can go this way, it might go that way, it might go different ways. And there are different possibilities you look at. But ultimately you would want to connect it back to the river, if at all that river, that watercourse system still continues. But in some cases, I want to say, in some cases, when you do not have the luxury of connecting, what you do actually is to create artificial reservoirs, you know, places where you can discharge the water. You see that a lot in roads. I mean, even in Senegal, if you are driving through, you know, the toll road, and those areas you can actually make good use of by developing aquaculture opportunities.
We're running out of time, so quickly.
I think quickly what we need to understand is that there are what others will say nature-based solutions to this problem. And that is, we have to accept where that engineering alone will not fix it. And sometimes even leaving an open space may be even much better an investment than try to engineer one's way out of it by building more stuff. So for instance, currently we have similar situation at the Kotu Creek. That is the creek that goes from Kotu all the way up Nemasu and others.
To Bundung.
I mean, but that already there is a plan. There is already even resources to go through that and see which compound actually needs to move, so that we can have space and build that could be open and it will be absorbing the excess water. So the same thing will have to happen in Jabang.
I'm afraid Mr.
Have we run out of time?
Yes, the discussion is quite interesting, but you know, this is a state of affairs. It's just one. But then, I mean, well, viewers, with that we bring an end to this exciting conversation that we have with our guest this week, Mr. Alpha Robinson. Like I said, he's the Managing Director of Africa Consulting and Trading, a company based in Dakar. He had also served as the Managing Director of NAWEC. He's an engineer, and we urge the government, the president, to really tap into his experience to see how best, we can address the issue of this flooding risk, which is now becoming persistent. It's yet to be resolved. And of course, Dr. Malanding Asjaite, like I said, he's a Geographic Information System and Landscape Ecology expert, who is also the project manager of Ecosystem-Based Adaptation Project. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the State of Affairs program. And my co-host, Sidi, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be with you. Well, viewers, thank you so much for watching. On behalf of the production team, we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.